The feeling of bliss Sunny had felt while traversing the safety of the eastern quadrant evaporated as soon as he saw the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the vast expanse of undulating water into a million fiery shades. It was as if both the heavens and the ocean were aflame, enveloped by a beautiful crimson blaze, a sight no less breathtaking than the nightmarish vistas of the dream realm. This dying world had its own beauty to offer, as well, made only more poignant by its looming end. Beauty and danger often went hand in hand, though, and the oceans of Earth had long become home to unfathomable horrors. Sunny had braved the dark expanse of the Indian Ocean a few times, including all by himself soon after becoming a saint. He had survived back then, but the memories of the frenzied voyage never failed to make him shiver. Now, too, a cold chill ran down his spine. I wonder how bad the ocean really is. By all accounts, it could not be as terrifying as the death zones of the dream realm. Most of the nightmare creatures populating the infested waters could not be of a rank higher than corrupted. After all, even if a few great ones did reside in the depths of the ocean, they would not pose a serious threat to Sunny. If not for the gnawing suppression of the war realm, he could have cleansed the entire ocean of nightmare creatures, making sailing across it as safe as traversing the eastern quadrant had been. Of course, there was little point in doing so. All of Earth was going to become part of the dream realm soon. Before that happened, however, the dream realm seemed to have already invaded Earth in a way it was not supposed to. Out there, in the distance, something that had never been meant to grace the verdant reaches of Earth was resting on the waves, bathed in the crimson light of the setting sun. So this is the night garden. Sunny looked at the wandering great citadel that had ostensibly become the headquarters of the government, his face full of wonder. The gargantuan ship was truly titanic, spanning more than a kilometer from port to starboard and a dozen times that from bow to stern. Its ancient hull was made of wood but had no seams, resembling a hollowed-out branch of an unfathomably large tree. Its hull rose from the waves like a dark wall, the immense silhouette of the massive vessel appearing too enormous to exist on Earth. Sunny had thought that the alloy behemoths which had carried the first evacuation army to Antarctica were unreasonably giant, but the night garden made them look like toy ships. Despite that, it did not seem heavy and hulking like those colossal battleships did. Instead, the night garden seemed graceful in its elegant immensity, the flowing lines of its hull emanating a feeling of dark harmony. It rested easily on the water, resembling an ancient city rising from the waves. The ship was indeed like a city in and of itself, with dozens of decks, stunning palaces, and tall pagodas built on its surface, as well as hidden from view on its vast holds. It had wild groves, rushing streams, and deep lakes. Masts that were as tall as mountains rose into the blazing sky like trees, their beams spreading far and wide like branches. With the arrival of settlers in the wake of the Godgrave War, the palaces of Night Garden became homes to countless people. Its groves became cultivated fruit gardens, and its meadows became fertile fields. People strolled along bustling promenades, children played on lake shores, and countless colorful lanterns illuminated the great ship, making it glow like a jewel against the backdrop of encroaching night. The Night Garden was not as populous as Bastion or Ravenheart, but it was still home to millions of people now. Most of them were government workers and warriors or their dependents, with some refugees mixed in. The wandering citadel of the Demon of Repose was vast, but it was not vast compared to cities like Nosc. However, unlike ordinary cities, the Night Garden was layered, with many decks stacked on top of each other. That was how all these people managed to settle on it, making the great citadel their home. Safely hidden in the shadows, Sunny enjoyed the dreamlike view of the Titanic ship for a long while. It was a bit funny, but in all these years, this was the first time he saw the Night Garden. He had seen its likeness as a picture or on the screen, of course, but never with his own two eyes. The great vessel looked much more striking in real life, emanating a mystical feeling. It was almost as if the Night Garden possessed its own presence. It was not what Sunny saw that affected him the most, though, it was what he sensed. How strange. His shadow sense washed over the Titanic ship, trying to penetrate its hull. Just like in the Jade Palace and the Great Castle, it failed. His senses were dampened by the ancient wood, making it impossible to perceive what was happening in the great vessel's cavernous holds. The demons had liked their privacy, it seemed. Sunny did sense the shadow cast by the night garden on the water, though. And that shadow was not like the shadows that inanimate objects cast. Instead, it was more akin to the shadow of a living thing, and so, Sunny had no choice but to assume that the night garden was alive. Perhaps not in the way that Sunny was alive, well, he was a bad example, really, but alive nonetheless. In any case, the task of finding Jet among the millions of people had become difficult because of the Titanic ship interfering with his shadow sense. It was only when the sun drowned in the ocean and the night embraced the world that Sunny finally felt a familiar shadow. He smiled faintly. Time to knock on Reaper's door. Chapter 2582 Profound Perils of Spending Time with Strange Shadows plus, Turn off reset. Stepping through the shadows, Sunny found himself at the summit of the tallest pagoda of the great citadel. The towering palace was actually built inside and around the main mast of the night garden, surrounding its lower part with a cascade of tiled roofs and graceful terraces. The terraces themselves were gardens, with emerald grass covering their expanse and ancient trees swaying in the cool breeze. The summit was like a grove, the leaves whispering as they moved above the surface of a quiet pond. This high, there was nothing but the masts of the Titanic vessels and the stars above it, so the water reflected the starlit sky, seeming like a fragment of it. Jet was sitting on the soft grass, leaning against the trunk of a tall tree as she gazed at the distant constellations. She seemed to have adjusted to her life aboard the night garden well. She appeared more at ease than usual, at least, enjoying the rare moment of silence in comfortable solitude. Her usual government uniform was gone, replaced by an armor memory that resembled a wetsuit crafted from the inky black skin of an unknown sea monster. The thing was similar to the memories that members of the House of Night usually wore into battle, and was far more practical than conventional armor when fighting in the depths. Of course, it also outlined her beautifully figure radiantly, but having gone through the southern campaign side by side with Jet, Sunny had become somewhat immune to that sight. He did not make any noise, and yet, she turned her head in his direction, her icy blue eyes almost glowing in the darkness of the warm night. "Ah, Lord Sunless. Welcome to the night garden. I was told to expect you." There were lanterns hanging from the branches here and there. Walking into their light, Sunny glanced around curiously, noting the golden fruits growing between the leaves of the surrounding trees, and sat down as well. "Greetings, Saint Jet, just call me Sunny, please. Otherwise, I'll feel awkward." He leaned against a tree, looking at the stars reflecting on the surface of the calm pond. Jet chuckled. "Well, all right then." She remained silent for a few moments and then sighed. "I wanted to ask if you are younger than me, but then realized that the question is meaningless. After all, we are poised to live for hundreds of years, thousands, possibly, or even indefinitely. So, what difference do a few years make?" A lazy smile appeared on her lips. "It's a bit unfair, though. Even if we do survive until we are hundreds of years old, I will still be the oldest one, forever." "How disheartening." Sunny scoffed. "I don't know. I have felt like I am too old for all this crap since I was 16. So, I enjoy being older than other people. After all, I worked really hard to reach that age. My age is something that I earned, not something that just happened to me." And Jet had worked harder than most to earn hers, much, much harder, because of her flaw. He smiled and added in a neutral tone. "Oh, but I am still younger, by about 10 years. She gave him a resentful glare. "Ouch." With that, Jet looked at him curiously. She lingered for a long while, and then asked, "So, is it my turn to go on a dangerous journey and learn a profound lesson about myself, the world, and life from you?" Sunny coughed. What?" She grinned. "That is what happened with Kai and Effie, is it not? They told me about their misadventures. You received rave reviews, though, so don't worry." Sunny slowly shook his head. "That, in a way, I guess? I am hoping to avoid the dangerous part this time, however. Not everything has to be deadly and utterly terrifying, right?" It did not, but if Sunny was honest with himself, he had to admit that his chances of avoiding deadly and harrowing perils were quite low this time around, as well. He hesitated for a couple of moments, and then shrugged. As for some kind of profound lesson, I am not sure that there is anything I can teach you. You strike me as a person who knows exactly who you are, what you want, and how to go about achieving it. So, if anything, I should be the one learning from you. It had always been that way. Sunny had begun his journey as Jet's junior, became her equal after a while, and even managed to overtake her eventually, but throughout all these years, he had never once stopped thinking about her as a respected senior. Her experience and pragmatic wisdom had always guided him on his thorny path, was one of the main reasons he was still alive, really. So what would Sunny even teach Jet? The true essence of supremacy? He studied her for a while, then said in a distant tone. The essence of supremacy is a defiant resolve to see the world bend to your will. However, there is no need to teach you about that. After all, your very existence is an act of defiance against the world. Every day you continue to live is a testament to your will. Jet smiled. Continue to live, huh? Then, she leaned back and let out a quiet laugh. You and I are quite a pair, aren't we? Sunny raised an eyebrow. I guess we are. She looked at him with a grin. I mean, I am somewhat of a zombie, and you are technically a ghost. Isn't that amusing? Sunny stared at her for a few moments with an unreadable expression. Eventually, he let out a cough. I was thinking more in the line of me being the sovereign of death while you are the soul reaper, but yes, your description is certainly amusing. Jet nodded in satisfaction. So, Sunny, what exactly are we going to do? He lingered for a while, and then responded in a subdued tone. That is something I am going to find out soon. Before that, however, the night garden had to return to the dream realm. At dawn, Sunny was sitting on the shadow chair and watching the sun rise with a crystal glass of wine in his hand. It was quite difficult to get intoxicated as a supreme unless he wanted to, so the wine was nothing more than a symbolic gesture that Jet had insisted on. They had to celebrate the Skinwalker's demise, after all. Soul Reaper herself was reclining in a lounge chair of her own, with the striking vista of the night garden stretching below them. She looked at the lilac radiance of dawn and sighed. Life sure is odd sometimes. Sunny smiled faintly. How would we know? We're dead. Jet laughed. Fair. She remained silent for a while, then said with a hint of amusement in her laid-back tone, but really, yesterday, I was at war with a great terror. Today, the terror is gone, and the war is over. Mind you, I am not complaining. Who would complain about peace? Anyone would agree, though, that it was all quite sudden. Sunny shrugged. No need to worry, there's plenty of great terrors left to go around. He took a sip of wine, then looked at Jet with curiosity. So, what are you going to do next? And I don't mean it philosophically, rather, what exactly is going to happen in the next few days? Jet did not consider his question for more than a moment. It's all a big mess. Nobody has really decided what to do with the eastern quadrant yet, but honestly, that is of little consequence for us. The night garden was supposed to escort a naval convoy across the ocean. That has not changed. It will be our last voyage in the waking world for a long while, though, because the ship's reserves of essence are running low. We were meant to return to the dream realm after delivering the refugees to the northern quadrant, and that has not changed either. She lingered for a moment and then added neutrally. So, we will return to the storm sea after about a week. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Reserves of essence? And how, exactly, does the night garden replenish itself in the dream realm? Jet smiled, looking at the magnificent landscape of the Titanic ship with a hint of affection. There are two main ways. She pointed up. Have you not wondered why this ship has such tall masts, but no sails? The masts of the night garden were terrifyingly tall, extending many kilometers into the sky. The main mast, especially, was tall like a mountain. Each horizontal beam attached to them was long and wide enough to serve as a street, but there was no human dwelling there despite the limited space on the decks of the massive vessel. There were no sails either. Sunny shrugged. The question did cross my mind. He was not ignorant of how the night garden functioned, of course. However, hearing it from the woman who had ruled the great citadel for more than a year was more valuable than theoretical knowledge or listening to hearsay. Jet exhaled slowly. The masts serve as lightning rods. They attract lightning, and the ship absorbs its power. So, to help it replenish its reserves, all we need to do is brave a storm, one of the mystical storms of the storm sea, best of all. Those are nothing short of apocalyptic in their scope and scale, but the night garden can barrel through one without much trouble. This ship is truly unyielding. She yawned. The second way is to feed it nightmare creatures. The more, the better. Sunny remained silent for a while, staring at her with an unreadable expression. And how, exactly, does it eat those nightmare creatures? Jet smiled. Well, it doesn't actually chew and devour them. The night garden might resemble a living thing, but it does not have a maw. Instead, the nightmare creatures get absorbed into the hull, and then, digested by it, I guess. Her smile seemed a little ironic. The ship can absorb some essence that way, but the primary purpose of that particular method seems to be resource collection to allow the hull to repair itself. That is what the remaining members of the House of Night think, at least. Jet looked at Sunny and said in an even tone. Oh, and it is not nightmare creatures that the hull of the night garden will absorb. In truth, it does not differentiate between living beings, anything will do. So, don't go around crawling on the outer hull, not that I thought that you would. She smiled slightly and looked away. In a way, it makes sense. The masts of the night garden are like branches and leaves, absorbing celestial energy, while its hull is like roots, absorbing minerals and the like from the earth, or the ocean, to be precise. In any case, the ship needs to replenish itself from time to time, and the storm sea is the perfect place for that to happen. Sunny remained silent for a while, and then asked in a tone that betrayed a hint of grim apprehension. And what happens if the night garden is not fed on time? Jet chuckled. In short? Nothing, really. She looked at the last vestiges of darkness hiding on the western horizon. The night garden was starved and largely dormant when the Nightwalker first discovered and claimed it. However, it was not dead, and neither was it starving. Although lightning and nightmare creatures are its main sources of sustenance, they aren't the only ones. The ship can also absorb starlight, ambient spirit essence, seaweed and coral, the energy of the wind, the force of the waves, anything and everything, really. Its capacity to repair and refuel itself is almost inexhaustible. Jet grinned. Which is quite fitting, considering that it was created by the demon of repose. She was the demon of rest and rejuvenation, after all, so her ship was able to endlessly repair and restore itself, it seems. Looking at Sunny, Jet then raised an eyebrow. That demon, she does not sound as terrifying as the rest of her siblings, does she? I mean, what's so scary about rest and restoration? Sunny gave her a long, somber look. That just sounds like the demon of repose will end up being the most harrowing of them all. Doesn't it? Jet met his gaze, then pursed her lips and looked away. I do hate to admit it, but you make a good point. Author's note, the third chapter will be published tomorrow. Once the sun rose, Sunny hid himself in Jet's shadow as she went about preparing the night garden for departure from the eastern quadrant. The demonic ship's stay here had ended up on an unexpected note, but people seemed to be elated to know that the war against the Skinwalker was over. They were beyond themselves. Really, humanity had suffered a long streak of debilitating losses here in the waking world over the past few decades, each one bringing it one step closer to complete annihilation. The devastation of America, the fall of Antarctica. People expected Australia to follow them in becoming a lost cause as well, but now it was unexpectedly saved. That astonishing reversal did not merely impact the eastern quadrant, but also gave people a hope that the downward spiral of Earth as a whole could come to an end. Of course, they knew by now that their homeworld was not going to exist for much longer, but that future was too distant and too daunting to truly fathom. So, today, they were celebrating. Nobody really knew how the Skinwalker had fallen, because the authorities of the human domain had not issued a statement yet. Rumors and theories were of course abound, one more fantastical than the next. Sunny was curious to see how the public's reaction would change once everyone learned the truth of Mordred's ascension to the throne of supremacy. Would they be happy, still? Or wary? Would they fear another civil war? Mordred's reputation was not the greatest, after all, due to what he had done to the House of Night. Many of the remaining members of the former Great Clan were here, on the Night Garden, and had become the pillars of the local community. They were not going to be happy to learn that the executioner of their clan was a supreme now, and people who held them in great esteem would not be happy either. In any case, the truth was not going to come until a few days later. By then, the Night Garden would be in the middle of the ocean, sailing across its perilous expanse to the distant shores of the northern quadrant. Sunny was quite curious about the seafaring Great Citadel. He was familiar with the chain breaker quite well, and wanted to know if the Night Garden operated in a similar fashion. As it turned out, although there were some outward similarities, there was little in common between the two enchanted ships. The chain breaker was a creation of exquisite, but ultimately mundane runic sorcery. It used the sole essence of the sacred tree that grew around its mast to empower the runic array, which kept the ship in the air and propelled it across the sky. The helmsman connected to the array by entering the runic circle and infusing it with their own essence, then steered the vessel with 2 steering oars. There were some mystical qualities to the chain breaker and the materials used to craft it, but Sunny could at least understand the principles of everything that went into making the graceful vessel fly. He could not fathom how the Night Garden moved at all, though. There was a helmsman's runic circle as well, which was far more elaborate than the one on the chain breaker, but it was not connected to a runic array. In fact, there was no array to speak of anywhere on the ship. There were no sails either, and obviously, the ancient ship was too heavy and gargantuan to be pushed forward by rowing. There was no discernible reason for it to move at all. And yet, it did move. As long as the master of the Night Garden willed it, the titanic ship would sail forward as if carried by invisible winds. It could reach truly frightening speed, as well, and Sunny suspected that they had not discovered its full potential yet, either. After all, the Night Garden had not been created to be steered by a mere saint. It gave a supreme the power to open gates between 2 spaces in the same realm, for example, so what would it have been capable of when the demon of repose herself controlled it? Where would it have been able to travel? How far would it have been able to go? The Night Garden contained its own isolated ecosystem. It could travel freely, absorb all kinds of energies to maintain itself, and provide its passengers with everything they needed to live. As Sunny thought about it, an eerie thought crossed his mind. The thought that perhaps one day, long after all of existence was consumed by corruption, the titanic ship of the demon of repose would still continue to sail, drifting across the boundless dark expanse of the void. I'm not sure if that image is hopeful or ominous. More importantly, since the Night Garden was a living thing, could that thing get corrupted itself? What would happen to the passengers if it did? How scary. The bridge of the titanic ship was in the same great pagoda where Jet's private quarters and spacious room garden were located, just a few floors below the spot where they had enjoyed wine while watching the sun rise. It was a vast room with elegant arched windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, and due to the pagoda's great height, one had a perfect view of most of the ship and its surroundings from here. An elaborate runic circle was etched into the floor, igniting with ethereal light for a few moments when Jet stepped inside. The main mast of the ship was behind them, blocking the view in that direction, but as she had explained to Sunny on the way down, the person connected to the elaborate runic circle shared a kind of awareness with the ship, so she could sense what was happening behind the Night Garden as well while steering it. Sunny did not know what exactly he had expected from the bridge of the Great Citadel, but he imagined it as something out of a space exploration drama, a great hall with an imposing chair meant for the captain and various stations for the crew placed around it. However, there was no chair. There were no stations either, which made sense, in hindsight. After all, the demon of repose would not have needed the assistance of subordinates to steer her own ship. There were some people on the bridge at the moment, though, because Jet was not quite a demon. Giving them a short greeting, she stood in the center of the runic circle and smiled. "Shall we depart, ladies and gentlemen?" Sunny sensed the great ship moving beneath him. It seemed strangely wrong, for something as immense as the night garden to move. And yet, it did slowly at first, and then faster and faster. The titanic ship began to glide across the undulating waves. The oceanic waves themselves seemed impossibly small as they broke against its living hull, merging into a flat aquamarine plain while stretching toward the distant horizon. It was as if an entire island suddenly decided to move on, complete with a city full of millions of people. The groves were moving, the meadows were moving, and the lakes were moving as well. Sunny knew that there was nothing odd about it, logically, and yet his mind was failing to reconcile the inconceivable scale of it all with what was happening. This world, it truly knows how to make one feel small, does it not? And that was coming from someone who could turn into a 100-meter-tall colossus whenever he wished. A loud cheer reached the runic hall from the upper decks of the night garden, where people had poured onto the promenades along the edges of the titanic ship to watch it depart from the eastern quadrant. The atmosphere, despite the perilous journey that awaited them, felt bright and festive. For some of them, this was just another journey. For some, those who had boarded the great citadel in the eastern quadrant as refugees, it was the first voyage. Their continent was liberated from the clutches of the skinwalker now, but their cities and homes were already gone, so the newcomers were eager to experience the seas and build a new home for themselves on the night garden. Sunny had only spent one morning on the titanic ship, but he could already tell that life here was one of starkly opposing extremes. The great citadel itself was idyllic and beautiful beyond belief, while the storms assaulting its impregnable hull and the nightmare creatures besetting it were furious and chillingly horrifying. Somehow, though, the dread of the dark and tumultuous seas only made the vibrant beauty of the night garden more comforting. Plus, it belonged to Soul Reaper Jet. She had come far from the days when people who knew of her mostly awakened treated her with distaste and aversion due to the ruthless cruelty of her murderous ways. Now, there was no person in the world who did not know the Soul Reaper, and her reputation, while not as loud as that of the other great champions of humanity, was stellar. People treated her with the respect and esteem reserved only for those who had earned it. Jet had always been a professional, and her profession was serving humanity. She had a spotless track record of being good at her job, as well, so being under Soul Reaper's wing meant being safe. That was why refugees were happy to settle on the night garden and become a part of the community here. What is this feeling? Hiding in Jet's shadow and watching her steer the titanic citadel while giving her subordinates commands, Sunny felt his heart swell a little. He felt like a proud parent, proud child, proud student, or a comrade, perhaps. In any case, Sunny had to get down to business. He was reasonably sure that the sixth fragment of Weaver's lineage was hidden somewhere on the night garden, or at least somewhere where the night garden could help him reach. At the moment, Sunny was being suppressed by the war realm, so he could not search too actively, but that did not mean that he could not do anything. As the night garden slowly moved along the coast of Australia, Sunny extended his shadow sense in all directions, or at least tried to. The hull of the ancient vessel was interfering with his perception, so he could not cast a wide net. He could still explore the ancient vessel bit by bit, though, finding paths where the living wood did not block his senses. The night garden had countless decks and cavernous holds, with bustling activity of a thriving city. It was also full of strange and wondrous things, so finding one well-hidden anomaly here was going to be much harder than finding a needle in a haystack. Sunny could sense the entirety of a haystack in a split second, find the needle, and count each individual strand of hay on top of that. Actually, he already had a needle, Weaver's needle, so he would not need to do something so senseless, to begin with. However, finding the fragment of Weaver's lineage was going to take a lot of effort and meticulous work. Sadly, an annoying distraction kept invading his senses when he tried to focus. At first, there was the sound of wings. Then, there was the sound of small talons click-clacking on the wooden floor. Then, someone aimed a persistent stare at him. "It's all right, lamb hidden in Jet's shadow. No one can see me." But then, someone jumped onto the shadow, walked this way and that across its surface, and even pecked at it with a sharp beak a few times. Letting out a quiet sigh, Sunny focused on his immediate surroundings. A black bird was standing on top of him, looking down with unreadable round eyes. Its inky feathers glistened in the morning light. Crow pecked Jet's shadow one more time, then spread its wings and cawed loudly, "Sane! Sane!" Sunny gritted his teeth metaphorically speaking and produced a quiet whisper, "Get off me, stupid bird. Go away." Crow stared at him some more, then waved its wings a couple of times. "Bird! Bird!" Sunny sighed. "Yes, you are a bird. I don't even know how you noticed me, but please, stop blowing my cover and go annoy Jet, instead." Crow tilted its head, then hopped up and down the shadow a few times and flew up to perch on Jet's shoulder. Giving Sunny a smug look from his perch, it then cawed again. "Bird! Jet!" Sunny suppressed a groan. Something was telling him that concentrating on the search was not going to be easy,